السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
محتوى صادم حاول إلى حد كبير الاهتمام بالشباب، فضاعت وبشاعة صور إعدام الأقباط المصريين في ليبيا منتصف الشهر الجاري على يد تنظيم الدولة الإسلامية أرجع الحسم في كل الشكوك التي حامت حوله.
Today, we're going to talk about the most dangerous man in the history of the entire planet. When I say the most dangerous man in the history of Earth, that's not just my opinion, it's what former US President Trump said.
Last night, the United States brought the world's #1 terrorist leader to justice. Abu Bakr al Baghdadi is dead. He was the founder and leader of ISIS, the most ruthless and violent terror organization anywhere in the world.
The world's biggest terrorist, Abu Bakr al Baghdadi, who took over Syria and Iraq, merging them into one state for years. The man America launched over 100,000 missiles at and still couldn't kill. You won't believe how he finally died, it's going to shock you all. Today's story is different, folks, because we're talking about the most dangerous terrorist in the history of the planet and how he went from being a professional soccer player to the world's #1 terrorist, Abu Bakr al Baghdadi. Hey everyone, it's Mariam here with a new video. Before you continue, make sure to like this video. Do you know why? Because the information you're going to hear in this video is something you've never heard before in your life.
ما أستطيع أتكلم عن هذا الأمر لأنه حرج جدا بالنسبة لي وبالنسبة لأولادي. أولادي لحد هذه اللحظة هم ما يعرفون هذا.
This video is packed with such rich details, including insights from Abu Bakr's own wives and people who lived in the same neighborhood where he was born and raised. But you know what? None of that matters as much as knowing how Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi died. It will literally blow your mind. So, like this video now, and here's a tip, watch it all the way to the end because the way Abu Bakr ended will truly shock you. The more you watch, the more you'll want to know how this man's story concludes. Dear viewer, after you've liked the video, let me welcome you to this special episode. Back in 1991, around 25 years before today, there was a family called the Badra living just north of Baghdad. They were doing pretty well financially, not the wealthiest folks in Iraq, but definitely better off than most of their neighbors. Think big 2-story house, private car, and even a maid, they were living quite comfortably. This family wasn't all that different from others, just mom and dad with their 2 young boys. The dad's name was Awad Ibrahim. He had a solid government job, not some top ministerial position or anything fancy, but he helped locals sort out governmental issues, and he was good at it too. Meanwhile, the mom came from a conservative background and poured her energy into raising their kids right. So why am I sharing all this? Well, whenever we dive into stories about criminals in this series, we often find these key turning points, moments when someone veers off towards crime instead of staying on a regular path. Most criminals we've talked about grew up in tough environments or broken families. Those factors often played a huge role in them turning to crime eventually. Alright, so when I was digging into Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's life, I found out that he had a pretty normal and even pretty awesome childhood. They were well off financially and their house was one of the best in the area. This got me wondering, what turned Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi into who he became? After watching this video, you'll understand, but don't be shocked if it leaves you a bit stunned. It's totally natural to think that with such an upbringing, the kids would end up as a dentist or maybe at least one's an accountant and another's a programmer. Guess what? My initial thoughts were both spot on and way off simultaneously. The oldest son, Hamza, came along in 1969. He was polite, super smart academically, always calm with high morals and deeply religious too. You know the type, friend of the class sitter with neatly combed hair and glasses, no chance anyone could cheat him. Hamza grew up nailing his university studies with flying colors and thanks to his dad's connections managed to score a gig as an officer in the Iraqi army. Up until then everything seemed cool and typical for any family aiming for success through education and good behavior. So, the second kid after Hamza is Ibrahim. He popped into the world in 1971, and let's just say his childhood was a bit of an oddball compared to Hamza's. While growing up, all Ibrahim wanted to do was kick a football around. Seriously, nothing else mattered to him. Unlike his big bro Hamza, who looked up to their dad, Ibrahim idolized Maradona. He was madly in love with Maradona, to the point that his pictures covered all the walls in his room. The t-shirts even had a picture hanging inside the closet. His dream was to become a football player, and he was not interested in studying at all. The idea is that this is something that exists in almost every family, the boy who does not like to study and wants to do something different. The boy grew up and his love for football grew with him, to the point that he joined most Iraqi clubs. Even though he was an artist on the field, they used to send him away because he had poor eyesight. But he did not give up and continued to train and perform again and again, hoping that his skills would cover up his problems in appearance. When he reached high school, his family began to put pressure on him. Boy, enough of your playing. Focus on your studies. They left him for several years to do what he wanted, but the time came and they told him, enough fooling around and playing football. You must focus on your studies now, and here the pressure began to increase from his family, especially from his brother. Hamza, who is older than him, is all pressure and concentration, but the result was failure the first time because he simply did not study at all. The second time, the family returns with increased pressure, and he also fails. Frankly, the family and brother Hamza have become convinced that Ibrahim has finished the subject of studying with him, and it will be useful, so leave him alone, God willing. He stays away from home or plays all day and night at your convenience. Do whatever you want. But the thing that happened in the year 1991 completely changed his life and the life of his family as well. And believe me when I tell you that it is what happened that changed the lives of people on the entire planet Earth. To be more clear, what happened in the year 1991 affects even you personally, my dear follower. Simply put, in 1991, Iraq was participating in the Gulf War, and in this war, Hamza, Ibrahim's elder brother, was killed. Imagine that you see war events and consider them a natural part of life, meaning people just die. I mean, we all know that wars cause deaths and innocent people die every time and nothing changes. But after you watch this video until the end, you will feel that this death is completely different. Take Ibrahim, for example, who greatly admired his big brother Hamza and loved him madly. When he lost him and Hamza died, Ibrahim was greatly affected, such that he stayed at home for a whole year, unable to go out because of the shock he experienced. After that year, after recovering from his great shock, he decided to enlist in the Iraqi army to avenge his brother's blood. Unfortunately, they rejected him for the same reason that made him unable to play football: poor eyesight. Imagine the oppression. Abraham was literally wasting his life. He lost his lover and his brother, and at the same time he did not succeed in his studies or anything else, even at the age of 25. His life was closed to everyone, and everyone saw him as a failure and unemployed, without any work, study, or achieving the dream of avenging his brother. After all this organization and isolation from society, he suddenly heard on the radio about something called the Iraqi Martyrs' Brothers Honor, in short, meaning that if one of your brothers died in the war and you had brothers in high school and they did not complete their studies, the government would help them just because their brother was a martyr. He put his heart and soul into Iraq, and thanks to that, you'll be able to boost your grades, graduate high school, and get into college without worrying about the cost. The Iraqi government even recognized Ibrahim as the brother of a martyr. Ibrahim passed high school and entered university directly. There, he began to discover himself and his true personality. He went to the University of Baghdad to study there, and for the first time he saw the university and its buildings and got to know the new society into which he entered. According to official Iraqi documents, Ibrahim wanted to enter law or translation, but the government scholarship did not allow him to choose the specialty he wanted. The options available to him were very limited, and among them was the specialty of Islamic law, so he chose it. The strange thing is that Ibrahim, who was barely able to pass high school and did not like studying at all, became dead to the books of Islamic law and never left them at all. He loved this specialty and became attached to it in some way he could imagine. He never saw anything else in his life and completely forgot about football. He graduated from the university with distinction and finally felt that he had found what he loved in his life and decided to continue his studies. He immediately went to Saddam Hussein Islamic University in Iraq and completed his studies there and obtained a master's degree from it in Islamic law. He did not stop at this point, but rather returned and completed his studies and took a doctorate in the same field and became one of the few in Iraq with a doctorate in Islamic law. Ibrahim went from being a frivolous young man who did not like to study, barely passed high school, and loved playing football, to someone obsessed with studying and excelling at it, until he obtained a distinction, a master's degree, and a doctorate in this field. And here his story begins to take a very strange turn. After he obtained his doctorate, the Iraqi government hired him as the Imam of the Hajj Zaydan Mosque in Baghdad. Ibrahim passed high school and entered university directly. There, he began to discover himself and his true personality. He went to the University of Baghdad to study there, and for the first time he saw the university and its buildings and got to know the new society into which he entered. According to official Iraqi documents, Ibrahim wanted to enter law or translation, but the government scholarship did not allow him to choose the specialty he wanted. The options available to him were very limited, and among them was the specialty of Islamic law, so he chose it. The strange thing is that Ibrahim, who was barely able to pass high school and did not like studying at all, became dead to the books of Islamic law and never left them at all. He loved this specialty and became attached to it in some way he could imagine. He never saw anything else in his life and completely forgot about football. He graduated from the university with distinction and finally felt that he had found what he loved in his life and decided to continue his studies. He immediately went to Saddam Hussein Islamic University in Iraq and completed his studies there and obtained a master's degree from it in Islamic law. He did not stop at this point, but rather returned and completed his studies and took a doctorate in the same field and became one of the few in Iraq with a doctorate in Islamic law. Ibrahim went from being a frivolous young man who did not like to study, barely passed high school, and loved playing football, to someone obsessed with studying and excelling at it, until he obtained a distinction, a master's degree, and a doctorate in this field. And here his story begins to take a very strange turn. After he obtained his doctorate, the Iraqi government hired him as the Imam of the Hajj Zaydan Mosque in Baghdad. Everything was fine with Ibrahim in the mosque, and everyone loved him until the year 2003, meaning approximately 11 years ago today. But this is the year in which the American invasion of Iraq took place, and America occupied Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein's regime, and Baghdad fell into the hands of the Americans, unfortunately. Here, I want you to focus carefully with me because after all these years, from 1991 to 2003, Ibrahim did not forget his brother Hamza at all and decided to take revenge for his brother on the American army that killed him when Iraq entered chaos, war, and complete absence of law after the invasion. In fact, Ibrahim decided to take advantage of the situation and the people's love for him in the mosque, so he founded the first organization in his life called the Organization of the People of the Community and the Sunnah with the help of the visitors of the mosque who loved Ibrahim very much. But the rally around him was very weak. Hardly 15 to 25 people joined him, and they had no influence on the ground due to the lack of weapons, money, strength, and even real organization. When the organization tried to launch a first attack against the American army, the Americans quickly caught them because they were literally very amateurs. In the first face-to-face confrontation with the army, they stood there and did nothing. The Americans simply arrested them all after the confrontation, and this moment was a very big turning point in Ibrahim's life. Ibrahim's life changed completely when he entered prison, because it was not like any prison we know. At that time, because of the large number of Iraqi detainees held by the Americans, they did not put them in regular prisons. They would gather them all together in communal squares. There she found thousands of Iraqis present and crowded. Ibrahim found himself in one of these squares filled with thousands, but he was distinguished from the rest by his knowledge, religion, and culture. He became the imam who performs prayers and delivers Friday sermons to them, and he is the one whose speech is heard. Here he decided to take advantage of the opportunity to his advantage. He saw that there were major divisions among the prisoners, Shiites and Sunnis, supporters and opponents of Saddam Hussein, and many types and parties within the square. He decided to unite everyone under the word Islam only and prevent any other religious or political slogans. Indeed, he was able to eliminate racism among them alone, regardless of their ethnic and religious differences. All the prisoners became one under his command, and on his path, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi recruited all those present, and everyone followed his orders without argument. Exactly 10 months after his imprisonment, America considered that these gatherings had become a very low level of threat, so it decided to release him and his entire group. In the end, American presidents admitted that they had committed the worst decision in their history by releasing him and his companions. Because as soon as he got out of prison, Ibrahim decided to change his name to Abu Bakr al Baghdadi. Of course, he chose this name because he was obsessed with Abu Musab al-Zarqawi and saw him as his role model in life. All the people who were with him in prison testified that Ibrahim would only talk about al-Zarqawi and would ask everyone about him if they knew him, and if he found someone who had information, he would sit down and ask him about it in detail. After he was released from prison, he named himself Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi after al-Zarqawi and began building the organization of the Sunnis and the community in a completely different way than the first time. This time things were bigger and more dangerous. Instead of dozens, he had thousands of followers, weapons, money, and all the organization he needed. With record speed, he appointed new leaders and formed a terrifying and formidable force in the name of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Before he carried out any operation or attack, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was always trying to communicate with his role model in life, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Reaching Abu Musab was not easy at all. It was almost impossible because at that time the #1 person in the world was wanted. But after great effort and fatigue from Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was able to reach him. If you want to know exactly who Abu Musab al-Zarqawi is, there is a special video in which I talk about his personality. His name is not strange because at that time he was simply the #1 terrorist on the face of the earth and he was the founder of the Al-Qaeda terrorist group, which had very large power in Iraq. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's dream was to be part of this organization in any way possible. Frankly, after the first meeting between the two, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi became impressed by Abu Bakr's studies and his confidence in him grew so much that he asked you for a strange request one day after he was completely sure of it. He asked Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi to go to Syria and recruit people for the Al-Qaeda organization that was Abu Musab al-Zarqawi holds it. In conclusion, Abu Bakr actually went to Syria and recruited a large number of people and returned to al-Zarqawi, who became widely trusted over time. The relationship between the two was so strong that they remained close friends. Al-Baghdadi even forgot his original group, the Sunni group, and reached very high positions in al-Zarqawi's Al-Qaeda organization. He continued to rise through the ranks until he became head of the Shura Council of Al-Qaeda, which you can consider like the position of prime minister in a normal country. In the same year, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was killed in an Iraqi airstrike on the house he was staying in, following a betrayal by one of his friends. Honestly, this was the best news Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi had ever heard because he expected the Shura Council to elect him as the leader of the organization. But things turned out completely different. Instead, they elected a man named Abu Ayyub al-Masri. Al-Baghdadi wasn't chosen simply because he was known for his extremely brutal methods. However, Abu Ayyub al-Masri made a decision that shocked everyone. He decided to dissolve Al-Qaeda. The world thought this meant the end of Al-Qaeda, that it was over. But al-Masri had a different plan. He said, "No, we're not ending it. I just want to change its name from Al-Qaeda to the Islamic State, given that at that time, they controlled a lot of land and were essentially functioning as a state." Meanwhile, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was working hard to improve his reputation with the Al-Qaeda Shura Council so that after Abu Ayyub al-Masri's death, he could take over the leadership. In 2010, 14 years ago, Abu Ayyub al-Masri was indeed killed. At this moment, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi unfortunately became the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq. His primary mission as the head was to completely rebuild the organization, as his predecessor, Abu Ayyub al-Masri, had lost much of the territory they controlled, leaving the group on the brink of collapse. Al-Baghdadi decided he wanted to make the organization stronger than ever before. At the same time, the Arab Spring revolutions were just beginning, especially in Syria, where chaos and protests were widespread. The army was clashing with the people, creating a golden opportunity for al-Baghdadi. With full control over the Syrian-Iraqi border, he saw this as a perfect chance to expand into Syria. His plans succeeded as he forcefully invaded southern Syria, continuing his expansion until he reached Aleppo. At this point, the Islamic State became the most powerful force in Syria, even stronger than the Syrian army itself. After conquering half of Syria and half of Iraq, al-Baghdadi decided to change the name of the organization from Islamic State to Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, giving birth to the term ISIS. People began to wonder, who is this organization that seized half of Syria and reached Aleppo? Who is this powerful force called ISIS? And who is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? They couldn't believe they had just rid themselves of Zarqawi, only to face ISIS, whose control stretched from Aleppo to Mosul. The territory they occupied was larger than Syria itself. This state operated as an actual country with a full government system, ministers, deputies, elections, army, police, courts, and even declared Raqqa in Syria as the capital of the Islamic State. Unfortunately, the victims of this expansion were thousands of innocent Muslims in Syria and Iraq who were killed in the name of Islam. To this day, no one knew what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi looked like or even his real name, making him a mysterious figure. Amidst all this mystery, al-Baghdadi continued to expand his control, seizing most of the oil-rich areas in Syria and Iraq. And here, unfortunately, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi became the leader of the Islamic State in Iraq. His primary role as the head of the organization was to completely rebuild it, as his predecessor, Abu Ayyub al-Masri, had lost a lot of the territories they controlled, leaving the group on the brink of collapse. Al-Baghdadi decided that he wanted to bring the organization back stronger than ever. At the same time, the Arab Spring revolutions were just beginning, especially in Syria, where chaos and protests were widespread. The army was clashing with the people, creating a golden opportunity for al-Baghdadi. With full control over the Syrian-Iraqi border, he saw this as a perfect chance to expand into Syria. His plans succeeded as he forcefully invaded southern Syria, continuing his expansion until he reached Aleppo. At this point, the Islamic State became the most powerful force in Syria, even stronger than the Syrian army itself. After conquering half of Syria and half of Iraq, al-Baghdadi decided to change the name of the organization from Islamic State to Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, giving birth to the term ISIS. People began to wonder, who is this organization that seized half of Syria and reached Aleppo? Who is this powerful force called ISIS? And who is Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi? They couldn't believe they had just rid themselves of Zarqawi, only to face ISIS, whose control stretched from Aleppo to Mosul. The territory they occupied was larger than Syria itself. This state operated as an actual country with a full government system, ministers, deputies, elections, army, police, courts, and even declared Raqqa in Syria as the capital of the Islamic State. Unfortunately, the victims of this expansion were thousands of innocent Muslims in Syria and Iraq who were killed in the name of Islam. To this day, no one knew what Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi looked like or even his real name, making him a mysterious figure. Amidst all this mystery, al-Baghdadi continued to expand his control, seizing most of the oil-rich areas in Syria and Iraq. This brought in billions of dollars monthly, significantly increasing the organization's strength with ample weapons, money, and soldiers. What more could they want? In the midst of their peak power, the United States decided to form a full international coalition to fight this organization, with the top priority being to kill Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. In a short time, they carried out more than 40,000 airstrikes on suspected locations where al-Baghdadi might be and more than 150,000 airstrikes on critical organization sites. Can you imagine the power of these numbers? During this fierce war in 2014, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi made his first public appearance, and for the first time, people saw his face directly. In this speech, he declared the establishment of the Islamic State and appointed himself as the Caliph of Muslims. However, the coalition formed by the United States neither weakened the organization nor killed al-Baghdadi. Their power continued to grow, and their profits increased, leading to further expansion. Therefore, in 2016, the world decided to form a very large international coalition with foreign and Arab countries to fight this organization. They succeeded in liberating most of the territories that ISIS had controlled in Syria and Iraq. They then carried out tens of thousands of airstrikes on locations where they suspected Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi might be. Al-Baghdadi completely disappeared for 2 years, to the extent that the U.S. administration announced his death. The world rejoiced, believing that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was finally gone. However, what happened a few days later shocked everyone because al-Baghdadi reappeared and addressed his soldiers officially. This speech was a slap in the face to the U.S. after they had declared him dead, and fear returned to the world again as al-Baghdadi was still alive. Following the same pattern as with Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the U.S. announced a $25 million reward for anyone who provided information about al-Baghdadi's whereabouts. Just like with Zarqawi, al-Baghdadi was betrayed by one of his close friends who gave away the location of the house he was hiding in. However, al-Baghdadi had learned from Zarqawi's mistakes. The confrontation was not easy at all. The house was built to be completely fortified from the inside against any attack and was heavily guarded outside. Moreover, there were tunnels underneath the house leading to unknown locations. Despite the full international coalition's attack on that house, al-Baghdadi, 2 of his children, and 2 of his guards managed to escape, while hundreds of his followers were killed. The U.S. announced that while they did not kill al-Baghdadi, he had likely lost a limb or was paralyzed. However, in 2019, approximately 5 years ago, another shocking event occurred. Al-Baghdadi made his second public appearance, contrary to the U.S. administration's claims. He was in perfect health, with no lost limbs, no paralysis, not even a scratch. He even announced new attacks on Sri Lanka and several other countries. A few weeks later, he was betrayed once more by one of his close associates, enticed by the U.S. reward. This time, the coalition was better prepared, knowing about the tunnels he might escape through. They brought highly trained police dogs to track him in the tunnels.
Tonight was a great night for the United States and for the world. A brutal killer, one who has caused so much hardship and death, has violently been eliminated. He will never again harm another innocent man, woman, or child. He died like a dog. He died like a coward. The world is now a much safer place.
A major airstrike and ground assault were launched, but when they entered the house, they found it empty. Assuming he had escaped through the tunnels, they released the dogs into the tunnels. In what I consider the strangest part of al-Baghdadi's story, the man whom America had targeted with over 100,000 missiles, the man who had eluded an international coalition of Arab, Islamic, and foreign countries, was ultimately killed by a dog. Al-Baghdadi, armed and having killed many dogs, eventually found himself overwhelmed, lying on the ground, being attacked by dogs. The dog that killed al-Baghdadi became famous worldwide, to the point where Trump honored it with a Medal of Valor, a rare accolade. Imagine, a dog receiving such an honor. But it was deserved. After all, this dog killed Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. This, my friends, was the end of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, arguably one of the strangest ends for a criminal in history. Despite all the missiles, weapons, nations, coalitions, and people, no one could get him except a dog. There is a lesson here, but I can't quite grasp it. Perhaps you can find the wisdom in this story and share it in the comments. Sorry guys for the long post, but the topic is worth it, and I hope you liked this video. Stay safe, stay happy.